The air in Daniel Mitchell's office was infused with the subtle scent of jasmine drifting through the open windows. New York City stretched out like a golden canvas beneath the afternoon sun, but Emily Parker barely noticed the urban spectacle. Her entire world had been reduced to this moment, to the electrifying sensation of his fingers gently brushing her cheek with infinite delicacy. "I'll be patient," Daniel whispered, his voice caressing each syllable, wrapping the words in an unspoken promise. "For as long as you need." Emily's heart was beating so forcefully, she feared he might hear it. At 26, she had never before experienced such a storm of sensations. Daniel's warm touch on her skin awakened dormant universes within her, virgin territories of emotion she had jealously protected throughout her adult life. 3 months earlier, when she accepted the position as personal assistant to the most enigmatic businessman in America, she never imagined finding herself in this situation. Emily had grown up in a traditional family in Vermont, where the value of waiting and the importance of measured decisions were virtues carved into her upbringing. Her mother always told her, "Valuable things are never rushed, my dear. Time puts everything in its proper place." Daniel Mitchell was 15 years her senior. At 41, he had built a financial empire from scratch after losing everything in his youth. His eyes, the color of aged amber, concealed stories Emily yearned to discover. Beneath the perfect geometry of his Italian suits and impeccable appearance, Emily had discovered fragments of a complex man, wounded by experiences he never fully shared. During those first months, she watched, fascinated, as he conducted multi-million-dollar negotiations with the same calm with which he savored his latte each morning. She noticed the small details, how he instinctively lowered his tone when he sensed her nervousness, how he appeared with chamomile tea at her desk when he saw her tired, how he remembered every insignificant detail she mentioned casually. The connection between them had grown silently like the roots of a tree, invisible but deep, intertwining beneath the surface of professional meetings, conversations that extended until nightfall over the Manhattan skyline, and glances that lasted a second longer than strictly necessary. But this afternoon everything had changed. A casual comment about her insecurities, a whispered confidence while reviewing contracts under the waning afternoon light, and the space between them, that carefully preserved neutral territory, had evaporated like morning dew under the sun. "You're extraordinary, Emily," he added, withdrawing his hand with a deliberate slowness that seemed to cost him physical effort. "And you deserve someone who understands that." Emily closed her eyes, trying to anchor this moment in her memory forever. In the perfumed silence of the office, a crystalline certainty formed in her mind. That whisper had drawn an invisible line in her existence. There are moments that divide life into before and after. This was one of them. The terrace of Daniel's penthouse offered a breathtaking panoramic view of New York City. The lights of the city twinkled like fallen stars, while the full moon bathed the skyscrapers in a silver glow. Emily contemplated the urban spectacle with a glass of Cabernet between her hands, aware of Daniel's presence beside her, seemingly relaxed, but with an underlying tension that only she could detect. 2 weeks had passed since that first touch in the office. 2 weeks of prolonged glances, of hands that accidentally met while exchanging documents, of silences charged with unspoken words. "My father wanted me to become a lawyer," Emily confessed, breaking the nocturnal silence. "A safe, respectable path. When I told him I wanted to study business, he looked at me as if I'd announced I was planning to join the circus." Daniel smiled, his eyes reflecting the city lights. Parents often confuse protection with control. They fear the unknown like everyone else. "Did your parents try to map out your path too?" she asked, turning to observe his profile silhouetted against the night sky. "My father was a simple factory worker in Brooklyn," he replied, his voice acquiring a deeper tone. "He worked 16 hours a day so we could eat. He didn't dream of me becoming a lawyer or doctor. His greatest ambition for me was that I might someday wear a suit, that my hands wouldn't be destroyed like his." Emily noticed how his throat constricted slightly as he spoke of his father. "And your mother?" "She died when I was 12. Cancer." "I'm sorry," she whispered, feeling the weight of that early loss. "It was a long time ago," he responded with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But she taught me something invaluable, that true wealth isn't in what you possess, but in how you love." Emily felt that Daniel was allowing her to glimpse a part of himself that he kept hidden from the rest of the world. Each shared word was like a small key opening doors to the interior of this complex man. "Sometimes I think we spend half our lives building walls and the other half trying to tear them down," she commented, contemplating the wine in her glass. "And some never get to tear them down," he added, his gaze now fixed on her. "The fear of being vulnerable can be paralyzing. Are you afraid of being vulnerable, Daniel?" The question escaped her lips before she could contain it. The silence extended between them, heavy and meaningful. Finally, he responded with an honesty that made her tremble. "With you, more than anyone." That acknowledgement, so simple yet so profound, made something expand in Emily's chest. The implicit confession in those words, that she mattered, that she had the power to hurt him, transformed the air between them. "There's a professional distance we should maintain," he began, though his voice betrayed his words. "You're my assistant, and I know," she interrupted softly. "But we both know that line blurred a long time ago." The first challenge materialized before them, the hierarchical relationship that complicated any possibility of exploring what was growing between them. The corporate world had unwritten rules, implicit judgments, tangible consequences. "I don't want to be an obstacle to your career," Daniel said, his face a mask of internal conflict. "I don't want people thinking you got where you are because of this." Emily nodded, understanding perfectly. Her professional worth, everything she had worked to build, could be questioned if they started a relationship. The injustice of it burned within her, but it was a reality they couldn't ignore. Under the Manhattan moon, both contemplated the first hurdle in a path they hadn't even officially begun to travel. The corporate archive occupied the basement of the building, a labyrinth of metal shelves under fluorescent lighting that hummed like a trapped insect. Emily ran her fingers over perfectly labeled folders, searching for documentation for an imminent audit. The air smelled of old paper and that particular aroma that closed spaces acquire where natural light rarely enters. That's when she found it, tucked between company and corporation documents, a photograph discolored by time. In it, a younger Daniel smiled beside a beautiful dark-haired woman. They were in what appeared to be Central Park, their hands intertwined, radiant with happiness. The corner of the photograph had an inscription in faded blue ink, "Daniel and Catherine, forever." Emily felt as if she had received a physical blow. Never, not once during their increasingly personal conversations, had Daniel mentioned a Catherine. The woman in the photograph wore what unmistakably appeared to be an engagement ring. Why keep something like this secret? What had happened to that woman who smiled with such confidence in a shared future? For the next 3 days, Emily kept her distance, tortured by unanswered questions. She observed Daniel during meetings, searching his face for traces of the young man in the photograph, trying to reconcile the image of the man she thought she knew with this new mystery. Finally, on a rainy Thursday when everyone had left, she closed the door to his office and placed the photograph on his desk without saying a word. Daniel looked at her, then at the image, and all color drained from his face. His fingers, which always seemed so assured signing million-dollar contracts, trembled slightly as he took the photograph. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice harsh. "In the archive, among incorporation documents," Emily replied, remaining standing. "You never mentioned you were married." The vulnerability that crossed Daniel's face disarmed her. It wasn't anger she saw, but raw pain, like a wound that had never properly healed. "Catherine left me 7 years ago," he said finally, his voice barely audible over the patter of rain on the windows. "She went to London because I pushed her away with my obsession with work. I lost the only person I loved because I didn't know how to balance ambition and affection." The confession floated in the air-conditioned office, raw and honest. Emily felt something fundamental change between them. She was no longer just the assistant attracted to her boss, nor he the businessman intrigued by his employee. Now she knew his most intimate failure, his most personal pain. "Why did you never mention it?" she asked softly, sitting across from him. "Because it's my greatest shame," Daniel admitted, running his fingers along the worn edges of the photograph. "Not the divorce itself, but what it reveals about me. About how I was then. How were you?" Emily leaned forward, trying to understand. "Obsessive, emotionally absent, convinced that building an empire was more important than building a relationship." His gaze found hers. Exactly the kind of man you should stay away from. Silence settled between them, dense but strangely comfortable. Emily contemplated the man before her, seeing beyond the powerful businessman, beyond the charismatic boss, to the imperfect human being who had made mistakes and still carried his scars. "The person you're describing," she said finally, "is not the man I know. I've tried to change," he confessed, "but the fear of repeating the same mistakes, of hurting someone else in the same way." Emily extended her hand across the desk, offering it like a bridge. After a moment that seemed to expand indefinitely, Daniel interlaced his fingers with hers. "We all carry ghosts," Emily said. "The difference lies in whether we allow them to direct our future or not." Outside, the rain increased against the windows, as if wanting to wash away the past and leave space for new beginnings. "Are you sure about this?" Jessica's voice, her best friend since childhood, resonated with concern through the phone. "Men like Daniel Mitchell live in a parallel reality, Emily. Their world has different rules." Emily watched the city from the window of her small apartment in Brooklyn, a neighborhood that dramatically contrasted with Daniel's penthouse in Manhattan. Below, street vendors prepared their stalls for the Sunday market, oblivious to the emotional whirlwind agitating inside her. "It's not like you imagine," she replied, though a part of her wondered if Jessica might be right. "There's more to him than meets the eye." "There's always more to everyone," Jessica replied with the pragmatism that had characterized her since they were children. "The question is whether that more is something you can live with." The conversation with Jessica had planted seeds of doubt. Although Emily and Daniel had begun to share dinners after work, increasingly personal conversations, and moments of growing intimacy, there was an invisible barrier that neither seemed able to completely cross. That night, seated in a small restaurant in Greenwich Village, Emily observed Daniel interact with the waiter. It was fascinating how he subtly changed his behavior, depending on who he was speaking to. Formal but warm with employees, authoritative but fair with executives, vulnerable and open only with her. Different versions of himself, perfectly compartmentalized. "Sometimes I wonder if I really know you," she said when they were alone again, the candlelight dancing on the contours of his face. Daniel looked at her intensely. "What makes you doubt? You have this capacity to show exactly what each person expects to see," Emily explained. "It's as if you live behind a glass wall. I can see you, but there's always something separating me from you." The recognition that crossed Daniel's gaze confirmed to her that she had touched on a deep truth. He rotated the wineglass between his fingers, contemplating the scarlet liquid as if it contained answers. "When you grow up with nothing, you learn to be a chameleon," he said finally. "How you adapt your color to survive in each environment. After a while, it becomes automatic." "And with me?" Emily dared to ask. "Are you also a chameleon with me?" The vulnerability that crossed Daniel's face cut her breath. "With you, I'm learning to show myself without borrowed colors, and it's terrifying." That confession, so simple yet so profound, melted something inside Emily. She understood then that they were both equally frightened, equally vulnerable before what was growing between them. "There's something you should know," he continued, his voice acquiring a tone of gravity. "The board of directors has expressed concerns about our relationship." Emily felt the floor moving beneath her feet. "What kind of concerns?" "The kind we expected. Conflict of interest, appearances, the possibility that it might affect the business if things don't work out between us." The corporate world materialized as a tangible presence between them, reminding them that their personal decisions had professional ramifications. "And what did you tell them?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "That my private life is precisely that, private." The determination in Daniel's voice was undeniable. "But I also assured them that nothing would compromise the integrity of the company." Emily nodded slowly, understanding the complexity of her position. "I could look for another job," she offered, though the idea of abandoning the career she had begun to build physically pained her. "No," he responded firmly. "I won't let you sacrifice what you've worked so hard to achieve. We'll find a way." The obstinance in his voice lit something warm in Emily's chest. As the candles slowly consumed themselves, and the ancient city continued its nightlife around them, both contemplated the walls they still needed to tear down, the external ones, imposed by a world that would judge their relationship, and the internal ones built by years of self-protection and fear. The most difficult walls to tear down, Emily thought, are the ones we've built ourselves. The company lobby gleamed under the morning light filtering through the large windows. Emily was reviewing the day's schedule when the elevator doors opened and a man of about 35 emerged with determined steps. Although she had never seen him, something about his features, about the way he moved, was unsettlingly familiar. "I need to see Daniel Mitchell," he announced to the receptionist in a voice that admitted no refusals. "Do you have an appointment?" Emily asked, interposing herself with learned professionalism. The man looked at her intensely, evaluating her. "I don't need an appointment. I'm Michael Mitchell, his brother." The surname fell like a stone in Emily's stomach. In 6 months of increasingly close relationship, Daniel had never mentioned having a brother. Another secret, another piece of the puzzle that was Daniel Mitchell deliberately hidden. "Mr. Mitchell," she began formally, "Mr. Daniel is in an important meeting. If you could—" "He's been in an important meeting for 7 years," Michael interrupted, an acidic bitterness distilling from each word. "Tell him his brother has come to see if he still remembers he has a family." Before Emily could respond, the door to the meeting room opened and Daniel appeared, halting his steps abruptly upon seeing Michael. The color abandoned his face, leaving him pale beneath his perpetual tan. "Michael," he pronounced the name as if it were a word in an almost forgotten language. "The same," his brother replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Do you have 5 minutes for your little brother, or do I need to make an appointment with your assistant?" The tension between them was palpable, cutting like broken glass. Emily observed Daniel, waiting for instructions, but he seemed momentarily incapable of articulating words. "Come to my office," he said finally, recovering his composure. His gaze briefly met Emily's, conveying a silent apology, before leading his brother to the private office. The doors closed, but the transparent glass that formed the walls of the office, a symbol of Daniel's commitment to corporate transparency, allowed a view of the scene unfolding inside. She couldn't hear the words, but the body language spoke volumes. Michael gesticulating vehemently, Daniel initially rigid, defensive, then running his hand through his hair in a gesture that Emily had learned to associate with profound agitation. 20 minutes later, the voices increased in volume until they were audible through the doors. "You chose money over people!" Michael's accusation resonated in the lobby, causing several employees to look up. "And now you want to play at happiness with your assistant?" Emily felt every gaze directed at her, burning her skin like small pins. The comment distilled contempt, reducing everything she and Daniel shared to something trivial, inappropriate. The office door opened violently and Michael stormed out, passing by Emily without looking at her. He stopped only upon reaching the elevator, turning to throw a final look at Daniel, who remained in the threshold of his office. "Mum would be devastated if she saw what you've become," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. When the elevator doors closed, a sepulchral silence fell over the lobby. Daniel, always impeccable, always in control, suddenly seemed vulnerable, exposed. With a brief gesture, he indicated to Emily to follow him to his office. Once inside, with the doors closed, Daniel collapsed into his leather chair, suddenly aged by the invisible weight of what had occurred. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice hoarse. "You shouldn't have witnessed that." Emily remained standing, unsure of her role at that moment. She was his assistant, yes, but also much more, though that more remained undefined between them. "I didn't know you had a brother," she said finally, trying to maintain a neutral tone. Daniel looked at her with a mixture of guilt and infinite weariness. "There are many things you don't know about me, Emily. Things you perhaps should know before—" The phrase hung suspended between them, loaded with implications. "My father died 8 years ago," he continued after a moment. "Michael never forgave me for not being present during his final months. I was closing the merger that saved the company from bankruptcy." Emily approached slowly, sitting across from him. "And your mother? She passed away when we were children, as I told you. Michael was only 7. In many ways, I was more a father than a brother to him." He ran his hand over his face as if trying to erase the fatigue. "I failed Catherine as a husband. I failed my father in his last moments. I failed Michael as a brother. It seems that disappointing those who matter to me is my only consistent talent." The bitterness in his voice startled Emily. It was the first time she had seen Daniel truly broken, without the layers of control and security that characterized him. "Is that why you keep everyone at a distance?" she asked softly. "For fear of disappointing them, too?" The question floated between them, loaded with personal meanings. Emily understood that she was really asking, "Is that why, despite everything we share, you continue to keep a part of yourself inaccessible to me?" Daniel raised his gaze, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that cut her breath. "The problem isn't the fear of disappointing them, Emily," he responded in a quiet voice. "It's that I know with absolute certainty that I will." The rain rhythmically struck the office windows, transforming New York into a diffuse landscape of blurred lights and diluted shadows. Emily meticulously reviewed documents, although her mind wandered far from the numbers and legal clauses. 2 weeks had passed since Michael's visit, 2 weeks during which a subtle but undeniable distance had settled between her and Daniel. Shared dinners had become less frequent, conversations more superficial. He had immersed himself in a new international expansion project, working until impossible hours, returning to old patterns that Emily recognized from the stories he had told her about his failed marriage. History repeats itself, she thought bitterly. Except that this time we haven't even really begun. A soft knock on the door interrupted her reflections. Olivia, the executive secretary, appeared with a worried expression. "Emily, Mr. Mitchell requests your presence in the conference room." With a knot of apprehension forming in her stomach, Emily picked up her tablet and headed there, wondering what new barrier Daniel had built between them. The spacious room was empty except for him, standing by the window contemplating the rainy city. Without his usual suit, dressed simply in a white shirt and dark pants, he seemed almost vulnerable. "You called for me?" she asked, maintaining a professional tone that hid the tumult of her emotions. Daniel turned slowly. Something in his expression, a mixture of determination and fear, made Emily hold her breath. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice unusually hesitant. "About us. About what Michael said." "I understand," she replied, preparing herself for what she intuited would be a painful conversation. "If you think our personal relationship is complicating things—" "I'm in love with you," Daniel interrupted, the words coming out as if they had been contained too long. "And that terrifies me." The world seemed to stop around Emily. Of all the phrases she had anticipated, this had never figured among the possibilities. "You're pushing me away because—" "You love me," she finally managed to articulate, trying to reconcile the contradiction. Daniel approached slowly, until he was a step away. "I'm trying to protect you from myself," he explained, his voice charged with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. "From what I might do to you. I've ruined every significant relationship in my life, Emily. I don't want you to be next." The confession floated between them, painful in its honesty. Emily felt her heart beating so forcefully that she feared he might hear it. "I don't need your protection, Daniel," she finally responded, finding strength in a certainty growing inside her. "I need your trust. Trust that I can make my own decisions, even if that means risking getting hurt." "I don't want to be the man who hurts you," he whispered, the agony evident in every line of his face. Emily took the step that separated them, eliminating the physical distance that symbolized so many other invisible distances between them. "The greatest hurt would be not trying," she said softly, placing a hand on his cheek with a tenderness that contrasted with the firmness of her words. "You're so busy fearing repeating past mistakes that you're making a completely new one, assuming you know what's best for me, better than I do myself." Something changed in Daniel's expression, as if her words had illuminated a truth he hadn't considered. "I've always been in control," he confessed, "controlling variables, anticipating outcomes. But with you, with me, you have to learn to let go of control," she completed. "To trust not just in me, but in us, in what we could build together." The rain increased against the windows, creating an intimate world where only they two existed and the truths they finally dared to face. "I'm so afraid of making you unhappy the way I did, Catherine," Daniel admitted, dropping the last of his defenses. Emily held his gaze, seeing beyond the powerful businessman to the man who fought against his own demons. "I'm not, Catherine," she responded with simplicity. "And you're no longer the man you were then. We can learn from past mistakes without letting them paralyze us." Slowly, as if afraid she might vanish, Daniel wrapped his arms around her waist. Emily allowed herself to melt into his embrace, feeling something unknot within her, a tension that had been present for weeks. "I don't know how to do this," he confessed against her hair. "How to be vulnerable. How not to control everything." "I don't have all the answers either," she responded, her voice muffled against his chest. "But we can figure it out together, day by day." As the storm continued outside, within that room, something fundamental had changed between them. An invisible barrier had fallen, not the last they would face, but perhaps the most difficult. The fear of true vulnerability. Sometimes, Emily thought, the most courageous act isn't scaling mountains or facing dangers, but simply daring to love, knowing there are no guarantees. Emily's family home on the outskirts of Burlington was a white farmhouse surrounded by ancient maple trees. The taxi stopped on the dirt path, raising a small cloud of dust under the relentless Vermont sun. Daniel paid the driver, while Emily contemplated the residence with a mixture of nostalgia and apprehension. She hadn't planned to return so soon, and certainly not under these circumstances. Her father's call the previous night had been brief but devastating. Her mother had suffered a heart attack. She was stable, but the doctors recommended absolute rest. "It's larger than I imagined," Daniel commented, observing the farmhouse with genuine interest. Emily smiled weakly. "It's been in the family for 4 generations. My father says the walls tell stories if you know how to listen." She hadn't had time to process the fact that Daniel had insisted on accompanying her. "You're not facing this alone," he had said, as she hurriedly packed, cancelling all his meetings for the week, as if they were trivialities and not multi-million-dollar negotiations. The house door opened, and Emily's father appeared in the threshold. Robert Parker was a tall man weathered by the sun, with hands calloused from working the land, and eyes that seemed to constantly evaluate the worth of what they saw. His expression upon seeing Daniel beside Emily was indecipherable. "Dad," Emily said, embracing him tightly. "How's Mom?" "Resting," he responded, his gruff voice contrasting with the gentleness with which he returned the embrace. His eyes never stopped studying Daniel. "And this gentleman is—" "Daniel Mitchell," he introduced himself, extending a hand that seemed strangely formal in that rustic environment. "I'm a friend of Emily's." The word friend floated between them, clearly insufficient but necessary for now. Robert shook the offered hand with an evaluative firmness. "My daughter's friends are welcome," he said, though his tone suggested the final verdict was pending. "Come in. It's too hot to stay outside." The interior of the farmhouse was cool and dark after the exterior brightness. It smelled of jasmine and something cooking slowly. The white walls were decorated with family photographs and a carved wooden crucifix. Daniel seemed strangely out of place with his city clothes amid that rural simplicity. Emily immediately headed to her parents' room, leaving Daniel and Robert in an uncomfortable silence. "So you're my daughter's boss," Robert finally commented, pouring himself a glass of water from a crystal pitcher. He didn't offer one to Daniel. "I work with Emily, yes," he responded carefully. "And now you're here, in our home," the older man continued. "Bosses don't usually accompany their employees on family matters." Daniel held the man's gaze without wavering. "I'm not here as her boss." Robert nodded slowly, as if confirming a suspicion. "City men like you often see simple things as disposable, including people." The barely veiled accusation hung in the air. Before Daniel could respond, Emily returned to the living room, her face more relaxed. "She's sleeping," she informed them. "The doctor says she needs to avoid any kind of stress for the next few weeks." Robert looked at his daughter with the kind of concern that only a father can show. "Your mother is strong, but she's not young. There should be someone here to help her while she recovers." Emily immediately understood the implication. "Dad, I have responsibilities in New York. I can't simply—" "Your mother needs you," he interrupted, with the authority of decades as head of the family. "The New York companies will keep turning without you." Daniel observed the exchange in silence, intuiting Emily's internal struggle. She was caught between her family duty and the life she had built far from there. "I can stay a week," Emily finally offered. "After that, I'll have to return." Robert shook his head, clearly dissatisfied. "Your grandmother cared for her mother for months when she fell ill. That's how things are done in this family." The silence that followed was charged with generational expectations and conflicting values. Emily seemed physically diminished under the weight of family tradition. "Mr. Parker," Daniel intervened with a gentleness that surprised Emily. "I understand your concern. What would you think if we hired a professional nurse to help your wife?" Robert looked at him as if he had suggested something offensive. "We don't need charity from strangers." "It's not charity," Daniel responded without losing his composure. "It's a practical solution that would allow Emily to fulfill both her family and professional responsibilities." "Practical solutions," Robert replied with disdain, "are for those who don't have the heart to do what's right." Emily observed the exchange with growing anguish. This was exactly the clash of worlds she had feared, her traditional Vermont upbringing versus the pragmatic modernity that now represented her life. "Dad?" she began, but was interrupted by the sound of dragging footsteps. Her mother, Margaret, appeared in the doorway to the living room, pale but determined. "Stop tormenting our daughter, Robert," she said with a firmness that belied her physical fragility. Her eyes settled on Daniel with interest. "And who is this handsome young man?" Emily hurried to help her sit down. "Mom, you should be resting. This is Daniel, her boss," Robert completed. "Something more than that, it seems," Margaret commented with the insight that mothers seem to universally possess. "By the way, he looks at you." Daniel approached respectfully, taking the hand Margaret offered him. "It's a pleasure to meet you, ma'am. I'm sorry about the circumstances." "Life rarely waits for ideal circumstances for its important turns," she responded with a quiet wisdom. "Emily, there's something I want you to look for. In my dresser in the bottom drawer there's a wooden box with old letters. Bring me the one tied with a blue ribbon." Intrigued, Emily obeyed, returning minutes later with a carefully preserved yellowed envelope. Margaret took it with reverence. "Your grandmother left this letter for you, with specific instructions that it be given to you when you found true love." She looked meaningfully at Daniel. "I believe that moment has come." Emily took the envelope with trembling hands, conscious of the fixed gazes upon her. The letter represented a bridge between generations, between the Emily who had been raised in this farmhouse and the woman she now was. "Read it when you're ready," Margaret added softly. "Some truths need their own time to be understood." The weight of that envelope in her hand seemed disproportionate to its physical size. Inside it, Emily suspected, she would find not only her grandmother's words, but perhaps also answers to the questions that tormented her about how to reconcile two seemingly irreconcilable worlds. "And as for staying here," Margaret continued, addressing Emily but looking defiantly at her husband, "I appreciate your willingness, my daughter, but I didn't raise an independent woman only to then chain her to traditional obligations. 1 week will be sufficient. Afterward, we'll hire help as your Daniel suggested." Robert's expression was one of disapproval, but he didn't contradict his wife. The use of "your Daniel" didn't go unnoticed by anyone in the room. That night, under the starry Vermont sky, Emily finally opened her grandmother's letter. Sitting beside Daniel on the stone patio of the farmhouse, the aroma of jasmine and warm earth enveloped them as she began to read aloud. Grandmother's letter had been like a beacon in the darkness, illuminating paths Emily hadn't considered possible. Written in trembling calligraphy, it revealed that her grandmother had also waited until finding true love, facing judgments and pressures from traditional America of her era. "True love is not found in a hurry," she had written. "It is built brick by brick, breath by breath, in the patience of one who sees your soul before touching your body." The week in Vermont transformed something fundamental between Emily and Daniel. He, who had always exclusively inhabited the world of corporate meetings and financial decisions, adapted surprisingly well to farm life. He helped Robert with the vegetable garden, rising before dawn without complaining when soil adhered to his Italian shoes. He spent hours with Margaret, listening to family stories and learning to prepare traditional New England dishes. Emily's father observed everything with initial skepticism, but even he began to soften. "Maybe I was wrong," Emily heard him admit to her mother one night. "There's more substance to him than I thought." The return to New York, however, brought with it the reality of the world they had temporarily left behind. No sooner had they stepped into the office than they were greeted by Lucy, the financial director, with alarming news. "Thornton Investments has launched a smear campaign against us," she explained urgently, handing Daniel a dossier of press clippings. They're spreading rumors about unethical practices and mismanagement. Stocks have fallen 12% since yesterday. Daniel reviewed the documents with an impenetrable expression, but Emily could see the tension in his jawline, in the way his fingers pressed slightly harder on the paper. "Call an emergency meeting with the entire executive team," he ordered, his voice acquiring that tone of absolute authority that Emily recognized as his crisis mode. "And cancel all my appointments for the next 3 days." Emily observed with apprehension how the transformation occurred before her eyes. The Daniel who had laughed under the Vermont sun, who had held her mother's hand telling stories to cheer her up, vanished, replaced by the ruthless strategist, the calculating CEO focused solely on saving his empire. The following 2 weeks were a whirlwind of crisis meetings, calls at impossible hours, and defensive strategies. Daniel completely immersed himself in the corporate battle, working until dawn, occasionally sleeping on the couch in his office. Shared dinners were cancelled. Conversations were limited to strictly professional matters. Emily recognized the signs. This was exactly the pattern that had destroyed his previous marriage, the obsession with work that eclipsed everything else. She watched helplessly as the connection they had carefully built seemed to vanish under pressure. One particularly difficult night, Emily found him in his office at 3 in the morning. The lights of New York blinked through the windows like silent witnesses to his exhaustion. Daniel was seated at his desk, eyes reddened by fatigue, surrounded by documents and stock trend graphs. "You should rest," she said softly, placing a cup of tea beside him. Daniel barely raised his gaze. "I can't. Thornton will present their report to the Regulatory Commission tomorrow. We need to prepare our response." "This seems familiar," Emily commented, unable to contain her concern any longer. "It's exactly how you described your behavior before Catherine left you." The words hung suspended between them, heavy and accusatory. Daniel finally looked up, and what Emily saw in his eyes startled her. Not anger or denial, but raw, naked fear. "I'm afraid," he confessed with a broken voice, so different from his usual authoritative tone. "Afraid of becoming that man again, of losing you like I lost everything before." Emily knelt beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. "You're not alone this time," she said firmly. "Let me help you. Let me be your partner, not just your assistant or your girlfriend. Let me in completely." Something broke in Daniel's expression, like a dam yielding to too much pressure. He dropped his head, resting it against their joined hands. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "How to fight for the company without losing myself in the battle. How not to sacrifice what we have in the process." "Let's start by not repeating old patterns," she suggested gently. "Set boundaries. Sleep at home, not in the office. Dedicate at least 1 hour each night just to us without talking about work. And if it's not enough?" The vulnerability in his voice was palpable. "If we lose against Thornton?" Emily held his gaze with determination. "Then we'll start again. Together. It's not losses that define a person, Daniel, but how they respond to them." That night marked a turning point. Daniel began to implement small but significant changes. He established clear schedules, delegated responsibilities he would have previously assumed personally, and kept his promise to dedicate time exclusively to Emily each day, regardless of the crisis's severity. The battle against Thornton Investments continued, fierce and exhausting, but now they faced it truly united. Emily contributed perspectives that Daniel, with all his experience, hadn't considered. Her fresh vision, combined with his strategic wisdom, began to bear fruit. One afternoon, while reviewing documents together, Daniel looked at her with an expression that mixed admiration and something deeper. "I've never had a true ally," he commented. "Someone who fought with me, not just for me or against me." Emily smiled, remembering the words from her grandmother's letter. Perhaps that's the secret of true love, building together, brick by brick, even when what you're building is a defense against those trying to tear you down. Under the extreme pressure of the corporate crisis, something unexpected was happening. Instead of distancing them, adversity was forging a deeper and more resilient bond between them. Like steel tempered in fire, their relationship emerged stronger from each test. "There are crises that break you," Emily thought as they continued working side by side. "And there are crises that reveal who you really are. The difference lies in not facing them alone." The elegant restaurant in downtown Manhattan vibrated with muted conversations and the occasional tinkling of fine glassware. Emily observed Daniel, seated across from her, his face illuminated by the soft candlelight. It was their first, truly peaceful dinner in weeks. The battle against Thornton Investments had finally ended, not with a resounding victory, but with a negotiated agreement that had saved the company's reputation and minimized financial damage. Both were exhausted but satisfied, aware that together they had achieved what seemed impossible weeks ago. "To us," Daniel toasted, raising his glass of red wine. "For weathering the storm?" Emily smiled, gently clinking her glass with his. "For learning to dance in the rain," she responded, recalling a phrase her grandmother used to say. Something in the atmosphere had changed between them. The crisis had burned away the last barriers of uncertainty, leaving a crystalline clarity about what they meant to each other. "I have something for you," said Daniel, taking a small envelope from the inner pocket of his jacket. "It's not exactly a gift, more of a decision." Intrigued, Emily opened the envelope. Inside was an official document with the company letterhead. Reading it, her breath momentarily stopped. "You're offering me a minority partnership?" she asked, incredulity coloring her voice. "You've earned it on your own merit," he responded firmly. "Your business intuition, your strategic vision during the crisis were invaluable. This has nothing to do with what's between us personally." Emily studied his face, looking for signs that this was a romantic gesture disguised as a business decision. She found none. "Aren't you afraid people will talk? That they'll say you promoted me for personal reasons?" Daniel smiled slightly. "People always talk, Emily. What matters is knowing who you really are and why you make your decisions." Emily looked at the document again, contradictory emotions wrestling within her. On one hand, she felt immense pride in the professional recognition. On the other, a persistent doubt about whether she could completely separate the personal from the professional, as Daniel seemed able to do. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "It's an important decision." Daniel nodded, respecting her caution. "Take all the time you need. The offer has no expiration date." They finished dinner talking about future plans, both professional and personal. The conversation flowed with a new ease, as if the shared crisis had honed their ability to understand each other. Upon leaving the restaurant, New York greeted them with a clear, starry night. They walked slowly, enjoying the simple pleasure of being together without the pressure of urgent decisions. That's when they saw her. Standing beside the fountain in Bryant Park, an elegant woman of about 40 was watching them intently. Her dark hair was gathered in an elaborate bun, and her posture conveyed an innate confidence. Even from a distance, Emily could see how Daniel completely tensed, like an animal detecting danger. "Catherine," he murmured, so low that Emily barely heard him. Daniel's ex-wife. The woman from the yellowed photograph who had left America and Daniel 7 years ago. The woman approached with determined steps, her gaze alternating between Daniel and Emily with curiosity, but without hostility. "Hello, Daniel," she greeted in a soft voice, a slight British accent coloring her words. "It's been a long time." 7 years, he responded automatically, his voice unusually tense. "What are you doing in New York?" "Work, a conference on sustainable architecture." Her eyes settled on Emily. "We haven't been introduced." "Emily Parker," she introduced herself, extending her hand out of pure social reflex. "Daniel's partner." Catherine shook her hand with an enigmatic smile. "Catherine Thornton, Daniel's ex-wife." The surname fell like a bomb between them. Thornton, as in Thornton Investments, the company that had just tried to destroy them. "Thornton," Daniel repeated, connecting the dots with incredulity. "Are you related to James Thornton?" "He's my cousin," Catherine admitted without a trace of guilt. "But I had nothing to do with his campaign against your company, if that's what you're thinking. In fact, I tried to dissuade him when I found out." The tension was palpable. Emily felt every muscle in Daniel tense beside her, as if he were physically restraining himself. "Could we have coffee?" Catherine asked, surprising them both. "There are things we should talk about after so much time." Daniel looked at Emily, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, understanding that this meeting was necessary, a ghost from the past that needed to be confronted. An hour later, seated in a quiet cafe near the park, Catherine was finishing explaining how she had rebuilt her life in London, becoming a recognized architect specializing in sustainable design. "I was wrong about many things, Daniel. she admitted with a frankness that surprised Emily. "It wasn't just you who was the problem in our marriage. I had my own demons, my own obsessions. It was simply easier to blame you for everything." Daniel listened in silence, his expression indecipherable even to Emily. "I needed years of therapy to understand my part in what happened between us," Catherine continued, "and I wanted to tell you in person, if I ever had the chance. Not to reconcile, that ship sailed long ago, but so we could both find peace." Finally, her eyes turned to Emily. "Don't let our mistakes define your future," she said, with surprising gentleness. "You deserve to love and be loved without guilt, Daniel, and she clearly makes you happy in a way I never could." The acknowledgement, as unexpected as it was generous, seemed to untie something within Daniel. Emily observed how tension gradually abandoned his body, as if an invisible weight he had carried for 7 years was finally released. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice hoarse with contained emotion. "For coming, for saying this." When Catherine left, promising to stay in occasional contact, Daniel and Emily remained seated in silence, processing what had happened. "Are you okay?" she finally asked, taking his hand across the table. Daniel interlaced his fingers with hers, looking at her with an expression that mixed amazement and gratitude. "It's strange," he confessed. "For years, I've carried the guilt of our failure like a perpetual sentence, as proof that I didn't deserve a second chance at love. And now?" Emily barely dared to ask. "Now I understand that two people can hurt each other without either being a monster," he responded, a new clarity in his gaze. "And that perhaps I do deserve this second chance life has given me with you." As they walked back under New York's starry sky, Emily understood that they had crossed another important threshold. The ghost from the past that had haunted Daniel for so long was finally beginning to fade, allowing him to be fully present in the now with her. "Some wounds need to be exposed to the air to heal completely," she thought, squeezing his hand. "And some reconciliations are not to go back, but to move forward." The governor's mansion gleamed under strategically placed lights, its years of history making it the perfect setting for the annual business gala. Inside, America's economic and social elite mingled in a ballet of power and connections, champagne glasses in hand and carefully calculated smiles. Emily observed herself one last time in the ladies' room mirror. The emerald silk dress, an elegant design that Daniel had insisted on giving her for the occasion, beautifully contrasted with her olive skin and highlighted the amber of her eyes. She had never felt so beautiful and simultaneously so out of place. This would be their first public appearance as an official couple and additionally as business partners. After weeks of reflection, she had accepted Daniel's offer, convinced that her professional worth deserved that recognition, regardless of their personal relationship. The restroom door opened and 2 elegantly dressed women entered, continuing a conversation begun outside. They didn't notice Emily, partially hidden in a corner. "Have you seen Mitchell with his new acquisition?" commented the first, applying red lipstick in front of the mirror. "The secretary he promoted to partner." "Very convenient." "Always the same," responded the other, adjusting her elaborate hairdo. "He hires the pretty ones, seduces them, and when he gets bored, he'll find some corporate excuse to push her aside." "Poor naive thing," continued the first, storing the lipstick in her designer purse. "Does she really believe a man like Daniel Mitchell is serious about someone so basic? It's just the thrill of conquering the innocent girl. In 6 months he'll be with someone else." The women left without having noticed her presence, leaving Emily frozen in her corner, the words lodged like ice shards in her chest. All her insecurities, carefully tamed during recent months, roared back to life with renewed force. Is that what everyone thought? The secretary who seduced the boss? A temporary conquest? A whim that Daniel would eventually discard? When she finally returned to the ballroom, she forced herself to maintain a composed smile, but Daniel knew her too well. He instantly noticed the change in her attitude, the new rigidity in her posture, the smile that didn't reach her eyes. "What happened?" he asked discreetly while they greeted a group of investors. "Nothing," she responded automatically. "I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. Throughout the evening, she heard the whispers, noticed the evaluating glances, felt the implicit judgment in every interaction. Or perhaps she only imagined it, her own insecurities coloring her perception of reality. What did everyone see when they looked at her? The competent partner or the opportunistic lover? The woman who had earned her position on her own merit, or the one who had used less professional methods to ascend? Over the next 3 days, Emily emotionally distanced herself, building invisible walls between herself and Daniel. She responded with monosyllables, avoided physical contact, obsessively immersed herself in work. Each compliment from him was filtered through a new lens of suspicion. Was he saying it sincerely, or was it part of the seduction game he would eventually abandon? It was Jessica, her friend since childhood, who finally confronted her. They had arranged to meet for coffee on her day off, in a small cafe in Brooklyn where no one knew them. "What the hell is happening to you?" Jessica asked bluntly, after listening to Emily mechanically relate recent events. "Weeks ago, you were talking about this man as if he were the reincarnation of all your dreams, and now you barely mention his name." Emily played with her cup, avoiding her friend's penetrating gaze. Finally, she related the incident in the restroom at the governor's mansion and the doubts it had sown. Jessica listened without interrupting, her expression passing from surprise to indignation and, finally, to a kind of exasperated compassion. "Let me get this straight," she said when Emily finished. "You're letting two vipers who don't know your name or your story define how you feel about your relationship, after everything you've been through together." Put that way, it sounded ridiculous, but Emily couldn't shake the seed of doubt planted in her mind. "What if they're right, Jessica? What if everyone sees something I refuse to see? A man like him could have any woman. Why settle for someone like me?" Jessica slapped the table with her palm, startling several nearby customers. "Listen to yourself. Someone like me. Who the hell do you think you are, Emily? You're brilliant, beautiful, have a heart too big for your chest and an intelligence that's left me in the dust since we were kids. If that man chose you, it's not because he's settling, but because he was lucky enough to find you." Emily tried to interrupt, but Jessica continued, relentless. "Since when do you care what others think? The Emily I know told half the town to take a hike when they insinuated that studying business wasn't appropriate for a young lady. The Emily I know moved alone to New York against your father's wishes. And now you're going to throw away a relationship that makes you happy because two jealous women don't think it's proper?" Jessica's words were like a bucket of cold water, waking her from a self-imposed trance. Deep down, she knew her friend was right. She had allowed her old insecurities, never completely overcome, to resurface with renewed force at the first serious test. "I've been an idiot, haven't I?" she finally admitted, a sad smile curving her lips. "Not an idiot," Jessica corrected with more gentleness. "Just human. We all doubt sometimes. The question is whether we let those doubts paralyze us or face them and move forward." That night, Emily showed up at Daniel's apartment without warning. When he opened the door, his expression of surprise quickly transformed into relief upon seeing her. "I missed you," he said simply, stepping aside to let her enter. Emily entered, noticing the small changes in the apartment since her distancing: unwashed dishes in the sink, documents scattered on the coffee table, subtle signs that he too had been struggling. "I'm sorry," she began, the words tumbling out. "I let myself be carried away by malicious comments and by my own insecurities. I allowed strangers to define my worth, to question what we have. It was stupid and cowardly, and I'll understand if you're angry." Daniel listened without interrupting, his face a mask of contained emotions. When she finished, he slowly approached until he was standing before her, so close she could feel the heat emanating from his body. "Do you know what scared me most these days?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Not that you were distancing yourself, but thinking that perhaps you had decided it wasn't worth fighting for this, for us." "You're always worth it," she responded with fervor. "It was I who forgot that I am too." Daniel took her face between his hands, with a gentleness that contrasted with the intensity of his gaze. "Never again doubt your worth, Emily. Never. Not for me, not for anyone. You are extraordinary exactly as you are, and anyone who doesn't see that is either blind or chooses not to see." As the reconciliatory embrace transformed into something deeper, more intense, Emily understood a fundamental truth. The most difficult battle wasn't against external judgments, but against the monsters that inhabited her own mind, those that whispered she wasn't enough, that she didn't deserve the happiness she'd found. That night beside Daniel, She took another step toward victory in that internal war. Not the last battle, certainly, but perhaps the most significant so far. Sometimes, she thought as she fell asleep in his arms, the greatest proof of love isn't what you're willing to give, but what you're willing to overcome to remain beside someone. Candlelight danced on the walls of Daniel's apartment, creating an intimate ambiance that contrasted with the spectacular view of illuminated New York that stretched beyond the windows. The scent of cinnamon floated in the air, mixing with the deep notes of red wine resting in crystal glasses on the carefully prepared table. 10 months had passed since that first whisper in the office. 10 months of growth, of barriers torn down, of patient construction of something that both felt increasingly solid and true. Emily contemplated Daniel as he finished serving the dinner he had personally prepared, a wild mushroom risotto whose recipe he had specially learned for the occasion. Seeing him like this, far from the image of the powerful businessman he showed the world, in a domestic and vulnerable facet, produced in her a tenderness she could barely contain. "This is new," she commented with a smile, pointing to the elaborate dinner. "I didn't know your culinary talents extended beyond lattes." Daniel smiled, a flash of nervousness crossing his gaze fleetingly. "There are many things you still don't know about me," he responded, sitting across from her. "I hope we have a lifetime to discover them." The intensity in his words made Emily's heart accelerate slightly. There was something different tonight, an undercurrent of expectation she couldn't completely identify. The conversation flowed naturally as they dined, jumping from professional topics to shared memories, to future plans that increasingly intertwined. Emily had finally accepted the partnership in the company, and her new position had allowed her to develop her own projects that were having considerable success. "I never imagined I would have the courage to propose the expansion into renewable energy," she confessed, taking a sip of wine. "And now it's our fastest-growing sector." "You always had the courage," Daniel responded. "You just needed the opportunity to demonstrate it, to yourself, more than to anyone." That was one of the things she valued most about him, his ability to see potentials in her that she didn't even recognize herself, not as a condescending mentor, but as an equal who genuinely appreciated her capabilities. After dessert, a homemade cheesecake that Daniel confessed to having practiced 3 times before achieving the right texture, they moved to the sofa with their wine glasses. The city sparkled below them like a reflection of the starry sky, and Emily felt enveloped in a sensation of fullness she had rarely experienced. "There's something I want to tell you," Daniel began, his voice adopting a more serious tone that contrasted with the previous lightness of the evening. Emily tensed instinctively. Despite all advances, a part of her still unconsciously expected that happiness would be temporary, that at any moment would come the blow that would destroy everything. "All my life I've been chasing something," he continued, looking at her with an intensity that made her tremble. "Success, recognition, wealth. I thought that if I accumulated enough of it, someday I would feel complete, that it would fill that void I always felt inside." He paused, taking a sip of wine as if seeking courage in the ruby liquid. "But the void was still there, no matter how much I achieved, until I met you." Emily felt the air leave her lungs at the raw honesty in his words, in his gaze. "With you I've learned that true wealth isn't in what you possess, but in who you are when you're with someone who sees you completely." He set his glass on the table, taking Emily's hands in his. "You've taught me to be brave in a way I never imagined. Not the bravery of risking millions in business, but the bravery of being vulnerable, of showing myself as I am." Emily felt her heart beating so forcefully that she feared he might hear it. There was a weight to this moment, a sensation of being on the edge of something transcendental. "I'm ready," she said suddenly, the words escaping her lips before she could stop them. Daniel looked at her, confused. "Ready for what?" Emily took a breath, gathering all her courage. During these 10 months they had shared ardent kisses, increasingly intimate caresses, but had always stopped before crossing the final frontier. Daniel had scrupulously respected the pace she needed, without pressuring, without demanding, honoring her decision to wait until she felt completely secure. "I'm ready for you," she clarified, her voice barely a whisper. "For us." "Completely." Understanding illuminated Daniel's face, followed by something unexpected, contained tears shining in his eyes. It wasn't the reaction Emily had anticipated. It wasn't impatient desire or unleashed passion, but an emotion so deep It seemed to have no name. "Emily," he began, his voice breaking slightly, "you don't know what it means to me that you trust me this way." Without saying more, he rose and briefly disappeared into the bedroom, returning with what appeared to be a small box. Emily's heart leapt, anticipating what it might contain. But when Daniel knelt before her, opening the box to reveal a white gold ring with a small diamond set in a classic design, the world seemed to stop around them both. "This ring belonged to my grandmother," he explained, his voice trembling slightly. "A simple woman from a small town in Vermont who taught solid values to a boy who would later become a millionaire but never forget his roots." Emily could barely breathe, the moment crystallizing in her memory as something she knew she would remember until her last day. "I don't promise perfection," Daniel continued, his eyes fixed on hers. "I promise constant effort, infinite patience and love that grows each day. I promise to be your companion in achievements and failures, your safe harbor in storms." A silent tear rolled down Emily's cheek as he continued, his voice gaining firmness with each word. "I promise to honor every part of you, your strength, your vulnerability, your dreams. You've taught me that true wealth isn't in bank accounts, but in connections that survive all storms. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she responded immediately, tears now flowing freely. "Yes, Daniel. 1,000 times yes." As he slid the ring onto her finger, fitting perfectly as if it had been designed for her, Emily understood they were closing a circle, from that first whisper of "I'll be patient" to this yes that opened the door to a shared future. That night, when they finally gave themselves completely to each other, it wasn't just a physical act of passion, but the natural culmination of an emotional journey they had undertaken together. Each caress was a promise, each kiss a silent oath. In the intimacy of the bedroom illuminated only by the city light filtering through the curtains, Emily discovered that true love transforms even the most physical acts into something sacred. Daniel's patience revealed itself not as passive waiting, but as active love, love that prioritizes the comfort of the other above one's own need. As the night advanced, intertwined in an embrace that seemed to contain all their past and their future, both understood that they had found something extraordinarily rare, a love that not only withstood tests, but was strengthened by them. The true miracle, Emily thought as she fell asleep in her fiancé's arms, isn't finding someone perfect, but finding someone whose flaws fit perfectly with yours, creating something stronger and more beautiful than any perfection could offer. The family home gleamed under the Vermont sun, freshly painted for the occasion. Garlands of wildflowers and intertwined lights decorated the stone patio, transforming it into a fairy tale setting. The scent of jasmine and apple blossoms permeated the air, mixing with the smell of warm earth and wild herbs that Emily inevitably associated with her childhood. 2 days remained until the wedding, and the farmhouse buzzed with activity. Relatives Emily hadn't seen in years arrived in dust-covered cars along the dirt path, exclaiming over how much she had grown, how much she had changed, how much she resembled her mother at her age. She observed everything from the window of her old room, where the wedding dress, the same one her mother had worn decades ago, carefully adjusted and modernized, hung like a luminous ghost. The duality of her existence had never been so evident. The Emily of New York, respected executive and companion of a powerful businessman, and the Emily of Vermont, the girl who climbed apple trees and dreamed of worlds beyond the wheat fields. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Her mother entered, her step slower since her heart attack, but her smile as warm as ever. "Your fiancé is helping your father with the tables," Margaret commented, sitting beside Emily on the bed. "I never thought I'd see a man in an Italian suit setting up tents under the August sun." Emily smiled, imagining Daniel in shirt sleeves working shoulder to shoulder with her father. He insisted on participating in everything. He says he wants to feel part of the family, not just a guest. Margaret took her daughter's hand, studying the ring of Daniel's grandmother that now adorned her finger. "Are you happy, my daughter? Not with the idea of marriage, but truly happy with him, with who he is?" The question, so direct and fundamental, made Emily consider her response carefully. "It's as if all my life I had been searching for something without knowing what it was, until I found it in him," she finally responded. "Not because he's perfect, but because his imperfections fit with mine in a way that seems predestined." Her mother nodded, satisfied. That's true love, Emily. Not constant fireworks, but that sensation of coming home when you're with someone, even in places you've never been before. A clamour of male voices rising in the yard caught their attention. From the window, they saw Michael, Daniel's brother, descending from a taxi. The tension was visible in the posture of both brothers as they greeted each other with an awkward embrace. The relationship between them remained fragile. After that confrontation in the company, they had begun to slowly rebuild bridges. Michael had been the first to step forward, appearing surprisingly in Daniel's office a month after the marriage proposal. "I've come to apologize," he had said simply, "for judging you without knowing her, for holding grudges too long." Since then, they had maintained sporadic contact. The wedding invitation had been sent with cautious hope, without certainty that it would be accepted. "I should go down," Emily said, rising. "I don't want Daniel to face this alone." When she reached the yard, she found the brothers seated in the shade of an apple tree, sharing glasses of local cider. The conversation seemed tense, but civilized. Upon seeing her, Daniel extended his hand, inviting her to join them. "Michael was telling us about his new project in Boston," he explained, his voice deliberately light. "A cultural center for children from disadvantaged neighborhoods," Michael elaborated, studying her with more warmth than at their first meeting. "Something I think our mother would have liked." Emily noticed the use of "our," a small but significant change that didn't go unnoticed by Daniel, judging by the gleam in his eyes. As the afternoon progressed, the arrival of guests continued. Aunt Charlotte, after whom she had been named, brought homemade dessert and unsolicited opinions on how a wedding should properly be organized. The cousins from New York appeared with extravagant gifts and a condescending attitude toward rural simplicity. Childhood friends returned with their own families, surprised that the rebel who had departed for the big city was returning to get married. Jessica arrived at dusk, embracing Emily tightly enough to cut off her breath. "Who would have thought?" she whispered in her ear. "My little Emily taming the financial wolf of New York." Dinner that night was an elaborate affair in the yard, with long tables arranged under the stars and lanterns creating a magical ambiance. Emily watched in wonder how Daniel navigated between her different worlds, chatting with her father about cultivation techniques, discussing economic policy with her uncles, sharing childhood anecdotes with her cousins. "He has a gift," Jessica commented, sitting beside her with a glass of wine. "That man of yours could convince stones to dance." Emily smiled, watching him gesture animatedly as he explained something to her Uncle Richard. "It's not just superficial charm," she responded. "He genuinely cares about people, about their stories." Jessica studied her friend with affection mixed with curiosity. "I never thought I'd see you like this, you know, so at peace. You were always the one who questioned everything, who needed certainties before taking a step." "I still am her," Emily responded. "I've just learned that some certainties don't come from proofs or guarantees. They come from trusting what you feel, what you've lived through with someone." The conversation was interrupted when Michael stood up, gently tapping his glass with a utensil to call everyone's attention. An expectant silence fell over the tables. "Normally speeches are reserved for after the ceremony," he began, his voice slightly insecure. "But I wanted to say something while we're all here, under these Vermont stars that seem to have been arranged especially for us tonight." Emily felt Daniel's hand seek hers under the table, squeezing it gently. "For years I was angry with my brother," Michael continued, his voice gaining firmness. "I blamed him for choices he made, for moments we lost, for the distance that grew between us. But these last few months I've learned something important. Resentment is like drinking poison, expecting it to harm someone else." A murmur of approval traveled around the table. "Seeing Daniel with Emily has taught me that people can change, grow, learn from their mistakes. My brother was a workaholic obsessed with sacrificing personal relationships on the altar of business success." A smile softened the harshness of his words. "And he's still a workaholic, let's not kid ourselves. But Emily has accomplished what seemed impossible, humanizing him, reminding him that life is made of moments like this, not just contracts and mergers." He raised his glass to them. "To my brother, who has finally found someone who transforms him into the best version of himself, and to Emily, who had the patience and wisdom to see beyond his defenses to the man he truly is, to a love that builds bridges, not walls." Glasses rose under the starry sky while Daniel's eyes shone with contained emotion. Emily knew then that this moment, this union of their seemingly incompatible worlds, was perhaps the greatest achievement of their relationship. Later, when most guests had retired, and only a few close family members remained conversing in low voices, Emily and Daniel escaped to the apple orchard. Under the silver moonlight, among trees that had witnessed generations of loves and losses, they stopped to contemplate the stars. "Scared?" he asked, encircling her waist with an arm. "No," she responded with absolute certainty. "For the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of the future." "Because we'll face it together," he completed, kissing her forehead with a tenderness that made her heart expand. In that moment, under the infinite Vermont sky, Emily understood that they had achieved what many seek their entire lives, a love that not only transcends differences, but celebrates them, a love that doesn't demand perfection, but embraces the imperfect beauty of two human beings, choosing each other day after day. The greatest loves, Emily thought as they slowly returned to the illuminated house, their hands intertwined like their lives, are those that allow us to be more authentically ourselves and simultaneously inspire us to be better than we ever imagined we could be. The wedding morning dawned with a sky of impossible blue, as if the very firmament had decided to dress in gala for the occasion. The farmhouse had been bustling with activity since dawn, local women preparing bountiful trays of traditional food, men placing the last garlands, musicians tuning instruments in the corner of the yard that would serve as an improvised stage. Emily observed everything from her room window, wrapped in a silk robe, her hair collected in rollers, while Jessica and her mother fluttered around her like nervous butterflies. "Something blue," Margaret murmured, reviewing an imaginary list. "You need something blue, Emily." "Grandma's brooch," Jessica suggested, rummaging through a wooden jewelry box. "It has that small sapphire, remember?" Emily barely registered the conversation. Her mind wandered along the path that had led her to this day, each obstacle overcome, each doubt faced, each moment of connection that had strengthened what now felt unbreakable. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Her father's voice resonated from the hallway. "May I come in?" Robert Parker, normally so stoic and reserved, seemed surprisingly emotional as he contemplated his daughter, not yet dressed as a bride, but already radiant with an inner light that no dress could equal. "You have a visitor," he announced, a strange mixture of resignation and pride in his voice. "That fiancé of yours insists on seeing you before the ceremony. I told him it's bad luck, but he's stubborn as a mule." Emily smiled. The tradition that the groom not see the bride before the wedding was precisely the kind of superstition that neither she nor Daniel would take seriously. "Let him in, Dad," she responded, ignoring the scandalized gasps of her mother and friend. Just for a moment. When Daniel entered, dressed in dark pants but still without his suit jacket, his expression transformed upon seeing her. It wasn't the look of a man admiring physical beauty, but something deeper, the look of someone seeing his entire future materialized before him. "I needed to see you," he explained simply, as Jessica and Margaret discreetly exited, not without throwing glances of feigned disapproval. "Before all the formality, before we become husband and wife before everyone, I needed a moment just for us." Emily approached, taking his hands in hers. She noticed they trembled slightly. "Is the great Daniel Mitchell nervous?" she asked with affectionate teasing. "Terrified," he admitted, with an honesty that continued to surprise her after all this time. "Not of marriage, but of not being everything you deserve." Emily placed a hand on his cheek, feeling the incipient roughness of his beard. "You are exactly what I need, with all your imperfections, and mine intertwined. I wouldn't change anything about you, not even the parts that sometimes drive me crazy." Daniel laughed softly, tension visibly leaving his shoulders. From his pocket, he took a small velvet box. "I wanted to give this to you in private," he explained. "It's something additional, not to replace the rings." Inside the box was a delicate white gold bracelet with small blue stones set in it. "Sapphires," he explained. "So you have something blue, and because blue was the color of the blouse you wore the first day I saw you, though you probably don't remember." But Emily did remember. That sky blue blouse she had carefully chosen for her job interview, concerned with making the right impression on the intimidating businessman everyone talked about. "I remember," she whispered, moved by the detail. I remember every important moment with you. Daniel placed the bracelet on her wrist, his fingers lingering a second longer than necessary. We should have eloped, as you suggested, he joked. All this pomp. It's important, she responded softly. Not just for our families, but for us. To publicly celebrate what we've built, surrounded by those who have seen us grow, separately and together. A knock on the door announced Jessica's return. Sorry, lovebirds, but we have a bride to prepare and a groom to keep in suspense. Daniel stole a final kiss before being ceremoniously expelled from the room. Until a few hours from now, future Mrs. Mitchell. Parker Mitchell, she corrected with a smile. I won't forget where I come from, though I now know clearly where I'm going. The following hours passed in a blur of activity. The wedding dress finally on, a classic lace design that had belonged to her mother, subtly updated but maintaining its vintage essence. Her hair arranged with intertwined white flowers, light makeup that enhanced her natural beauty without hiding it. When she was finally ready, her father entered to accompany her. The stoic man with hands calloused from working the land suddenly seemed vulnerable as he contemplated his only daughter dressed as a bride. You look beautiful, he said simply, the words charged with contained emotion. Your mother and I always wanted to see you happy, though sometimes we had different ideas about what that meant. Emily felt tears threatening to ruin Jessica's meticulous work with the makeup. I know, Dad. Robert offered his arm, more formal than she had ever seen him. That man of yours isn't what I expected for you, he admitted as they began to descend the stairs. He's better. He sees what you're truly worth, and that's all a father can ask. The farmhouse yard had been completely transformed. Rows of white chairs with silk bows formed a central aisle that led to a floral arch under which Daniel waited, impeccable in his dark suit, his face a mixture of nervous anticipation and pure joy. As Emily advanced on her father's arm, the violinist began to play a traditional New England melody, reinterpreted with a contemporary touch. The faces surrounding her, family, friends, neighbors from the area, colleagues from New York, blurred into a gallery of smiles and emotional tears. She saw only Daniel clearly, waiting for her at the end of the path, as he had been waiting for her all his life without knowing it. The ceremony was a perfect mixture of tradition and personalization. They had written their own vows, sincere words that resonated with their shared history. When the moment came to exchange rings, Michael stepped forward as best man, delivering the rings to his brother with an embrace that spoke of reconciliation and new beginnings. With this ring, Daniel said, his voice firm but charged with emotion, I give you not only a promise of fidelity, but the certainty that each day I will try to be better for you, through you, with you. Not the man I was, not even the man I am, but the man I know I can be when you see me through your eyes. Tears ran freely down Emily's cheeks as she responded with her own vows, words she had rehearsed, but that now came directly from the heart, transformed by the moment's intensity. With this ring, she said, sliding it onto Daniel's finger, I offer you my past, my present, and my future. I offer my strengths to support you, my weaknesses for you to protect, and the promise that each obstacle we will face together. Because together we are stronger, more complete, more authentic than we could ever be apart. The "You may kiss the bride" was received with applause and cheers that resonated among the century-old apple trees. But for Emily and Daniel, in that kiss existed an entire world, private yet universally recognizable, the world of two people who had found their home in each other. The celebration that followed lasted until dawn. There was dancing in the stone yard, embarrassing anecdotes were shared, countless toasts were made to the newlyweds. Traditional New England food was continuously served, accompanied by local cider that flowed generously. But the most emotional moment came unexpectedly, when Michael again took the floor, this time visibly affected by emotion and perhaps by wine. I want to make an announcement, he said, his voice projecting over conversations that immediately silenced. Daniel and I have decided to create a foundation in memory of our parents. The Mitchell Foundation will finance university education for young people from rural areas who, like Emily, have big dreams and the courage to pursue them. The announcement was received with an ovation that seemed to rise to the stars. Emily looked at Daniel with surprise and gratitude mixed. He hadn't mentioned anything about this project. I wanted it to be a wedding surprise, he explained, leaning to whisper in her ear. "Something that would combine my world and yours, that would honor where you come from and what we've built together." In that moment, surrounded by both families now united, with the man she loved by her side and the future stretching brightly before them, Emily felt an absolute certainty. They had found something extraordinarily rare in a world of superficial connections and disposable loves. They had found a love that not only withstood tests, but was strengthened by them. A love that honored the past, while confidently looking toward the future. A love built with patience, vulnerability, and courage to face one's own shadows. When dawn began to tinge the sky gold and pink, Emily and Daniel slipped away from the celebration that still continued. They walked hand in hand to a small hill from where they could see the illuminated farmhouse, and beyond, the fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. "Do you know what I thought the first time I saw you?" Daniel asked, embracing her from behind, as they contemplated the spectacle of the new day being born. "That I was incredibly efficient?" she joked. "That you had the most honest eyes I had ever seen," he responded, "and that it terrified me what they might see in me." Emily turned in his arms to look at him. "And now? Does it still frighten you what I see?" Daniel smiled, the rising sun illuminating half his face. "Now it gives me strength, because what you see is the best of me even when I can't see it myself." They kissed under the changing sky, marking not the end of a journey, but the beginning of something new, a marriage founded not on idealized romantic expectations, but on the deep knowledge and complete acceptance of each other. "I love you," Emily whispered against his lips. "Not for who you could be, but for who you are, with all your scars and mine intertwined." "And I you," he responded, "for teaching me that patience isn't simply waiting, but actively loving while time does its work." As they slowly returned to the celebration, hand in hand and heart with heart, both knew that this was just the first dawn of many they would contemplate together, and each would be a new chapter in a story that was just beginning to be written. A year had passed since that wedding under the Vermont sun. The Manhattan penthouse gleamed under the golden afternoon light, filtering through the large windows. Emily contemplated the city from the terrace, a cup of tea between her hands, observing how the metropolis prepared for night, lights progressively turning on, silhouettes of buildings cut against a sky tinting orange and violet. The sound of the front door opening drew her from her reverie. Daniel appeared in the terrace threshold, loosening his tie with a gesture she had come to find endearingly familiar. Despite the evident fatigue in his face after a day of intense negotiations, his eyes lit up upon seeing her. "Happy anniversary, love," he said, approaching to kiss her softly. Emily smiled against his lips. "Technically, our anniversary is tomorrow." "Technically," he responded, taking her hand to lead her inside. "I've been celebrating it mentally all day." The interior of the penthouse had subtly changed during this year of marriage. What was once an elegant but impersonal space, designed by professional decorators to project success and sophistication, now showed unmistakable signs of a truly inhabited home. Framed photographs of their wedding and shared trips, books stacked on small tables, a blanket knit by Emily's mother spread on the sofa, plants that brought life to formerly austere corners. On the dining table, Emily had arranged a simple but meaningful dinner. The mushroom risotto prepared following the recipe Daniel had learned for their special night, freshly baked bread, olive oil from her parents' farm, and a bottle of red wine from a Napa Valley vineyard cooling in an ice bucket. "No elegant restaurants this year?" she explained at his questioning look. "I wanted something intimate, just us." They sat down to dinner, sharing anecdotes of the day and plans for the near future. The Mitchell Foundation had begun to award its first scholarships, financing university studies for promising young people from rural areas. Emily personally directed this project, finding unexpected satisfaction in giving back to communities similar to the one that had seen her grow up. Daniel, meanwhile, had begun gradually to delegate more responsibilities in the company, building a solid executive team that allowed him to maintain a healthier balance between work and personal life. The obsessive workaholic of years past had learned, not without effort, that life offered riches that no bank account could contain. "I have something for you," Daniel said after dinner, taking an envelope from the inner pocket of his jacket. Emily opened it curiously. Inside were 2 airline tickets to Kyoto and reservations at a traditional ryokan. "Japan," she whispered, recalling how she had once casually mentioned that it was her dream destination, a place where tradition and modernity coexisted in perfect balance. "You always wanted to go." "I wanted to go with you," he corrected with a smile. "It makes no sense to contemplate cherry blossoms if I can't see their reflection in your eyes." Emily rose to fetch her own gift, a carefully wrapped package she had hidden in the study. "And this is for you." Daniel unwrapped it meticulously, revealing a leather-bound album. Upon opening it, he found a chronological collection of moments from their shared life, from the first photo together at a company dinner, she formal and slightly tense, he smiling with a warmth that contrasted with his usual professional seriousness, to recent snapshots of vacations in the Hamptons. "It's beautiful," he murmured, turning the pages with reverence. "Our story. A story in progress," Emily added, with a mysterious smile. Something in her tone caught Daniel's attention. He raised his gaze from the album to study her face, noticing a special gleam in her eyes, a luminosity he didn't recall having seen before. "Emily," he said slowly, a suspicion forming in his mind. "Is there something you want to tell me?" She took a breath, her heart accelerating with anticipation. "The last page of the album," she gently indicated. "It's incomplete for a reason." Daniel quickly turned to the last page. There, on an otherwise empty sheet, was a small black-and-white image, blurry but unmistakable, an ultrasound. The silence that followed seemed to contain entire universes. Emily observed the emotions succeeding each other on Daniel's face: surprise, incredulity, comprehension, and finally a joy so pure and complete that it transformed every line of his expression. "Are you?" He couldn't complete the question, his voice breaking with emotion. Emily nodded, tears of happiness forming in her eyes. 3 months, I wanted to be sure before telling you. We'll be parents in the spring." Daniel rose so abruptly he nearly knocked over his chair, encircling the table to take her in his arms. He lifted her gently, turning with her in an improvised dance of pure joy. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." When he finally set her down, he knelt before her, placing a reverent hand on her still flat belly. "Hello, little one," he said with a broken voice. "I'm your dad, and we already love you more than you could imagine." Emily placed her hand over his, their wedding rings gleaming under the warm lamplight. In that moment of perfect connection, she thought of the long road traveled since that first whisper in the office. "I'll be patient. For as long as you need." Daniel's patience, his willingness to wait while they built something true and lasting, had been the foundation upon which they had built their relationship. And now, that same patience, that love that prioritized growth over immediate gratification, would bear its most precious fruits. "Do you remember what you told me exactly 1 year ago during our vows?" Emily asked. Daniel nodded, rising to look into her eyes. "That each day I would try to be better for you, through you, with you. Now you'll be better also for him. Or her," she added with a smile. Later that night, embraced on the terrace under a starry sky, they contemplated the city that had been witness to their love story. New York sparkled at their feet, a sea of lights that seemed to reflect the constellation of emotions illuminating their hearts. "Sometimes I wonder," Daniel reflected, "how my life would have been if you hadn't walked into that office 2 years ago." Emily nestled against him, feeling the constant beats of his heart. "I think some encounters are written in the stars," she responded. "Perhaps we would have taken longer, perhaps the path would have been different, but somehow we were destined to find each other." "You believe in destiny now?" he asked with a smile, recalling how she used to insist that each person forged their own path through conscious decisions. "I believe in the decisions we make each day," she responded, "and in how those small choices, added up over time, lead us exactly where we should be." Daniel kissed her forehead with infinite tenderness. "And where should we be, according to you?" Emily raised her face to look at him, all her love reflected in her eyes. "Exactly here. Exactly now. Together." As the gentle New York breeze caressed their faces, both contemplated the future stretching before them. Not a path without obstacles, certainly, but one they would travel together, strengthened by each test overcome, enriched by each shared joy. The circle that had begun with a simple whisper was now completed with the promise of new life growing between them. And yet, it wasn't an ending, but a new beginning. Another cycle in the infinite spiral of love they had patiently built, brick by brick, day by day. In the perfect silence of the New York night, under the same sky that had witnessed their first meeting, their first touch, their first "I love you," Emily understood the deepest truth of all. True love isn't a destination one arrives at, but a path one travels. Not a safe harbor, but a shared journey. Not a moment of dazzling revelation, but a patient construction of everyday moments that, added together, create something extraordinary. And as the stars shone above them, silent witnesses to their past and future history, Emily whispered the words that summarized all they had learned together. Patience isn't simply waiting, but actively loving while time does its work. Daniel smiled, completing the thought. And our work is just beginning.